Hello there, welcome to the party. Today I wanted to make a different kind of video and I want to talk about some of the books that I've read. Now I'm not much of a reader, I prefer to learn through listening or viewing or just doing. However, there are some books that I have read that have, dare I say, changed my life. Now take that with a grain of salt because after all, every decision that we make changes our life. Nonetheless, these books have been pretty powerful. The first book that I want to talk about is The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. And the story behind how I ended up reading this book is really interesting. I was 21 years old. I was living in Vancouver in BC. It was a rainy day and I decided to walk into a bookstore. I think it was called Indigo or Chapters, one or the other. Maybe it's the same thing. I went in there and I was just browsing, mainly to stay out of the rain. I saw a book and it said A Guide to Spiritual Enlightenment. And at the time, I wasn't really into any spiritual, personal growthy stuff. I was just a dude busking on the streets that summer. That's what I was doing in Vancouver. But I saw this book and I was like, oh, that sounds like a good goal to work toward, enlightenment. Reading that book was really interesting for me because I had been totally opposed to words like God, Lord, Jesus, all of these, phrases that he mentions within the book. And ultimately what they are is to convey, this essence or this state of presence that once attained we call enlightenment. I read it at a time where all of this was so foreign to me, and now, just through my experience of living and diving into meditation and all these sorts of practices, 8 years later, it's crazy to think that really that was the beginning of my spiritual journey and really contemplating the present moment, the essence of life, how all of our suffering, the pain that we experience comes from our inability to recognize the present moment. And it's the story that we give to all of the things that are happening right now that causes the pain and the suffering and makes us feel like we don't want to be here, or it causes us to stress out or whatever. And I'll include a link to all of the books mentioned here in the description below. And my favorite book I'm going to keep till the end. I don't think many people would put this on their list of favorite books, but for me it was just really special. And if you're an artist or a creative person, I would highly recommend reading my favorite book. But before we get to that one, we have the second book. So the next book I want to mention is The Psychology of Money. It was the first book that I ever consumed around finance. It's basically talking about money and the psychology of money, and you can be rich but not really have the desired effect of being rich, and you can be poor and not have the expected effect of being poor. So there was a lot of interesting concepts in there, and one thing that stood out to me was the author mentioned that your financial decisions are your financial decisions, and there's not a one size fits all, there's not a best practice per se. And the example that he used was that he decided to just buy a house with no mortgage. And a lot of people would say that that's a bad idea because, the idea would be that you could take out a mortgage and then invest the extra capital into the stock market or whatever and make money that way whilst you pay off the mortgage. But he wanted to just have his house and he didn't want to have to deal with the mortgage. So he kind of said F you to the status quo on mortgages and just bought a house. And I thought, oh, that's pretty cool. This guy's just doing his own thing because that's what makes him feel good. And I think when you're living your life, you got to live your life. And, things that make me feel good or your neighbor feel good might not make you feel good. And it's most important that you live for yourself and make decisions for yourself. So I wouldn't say it's essential to read that entire book to get the value out of it. But if you used a book summary platform like Shortform as an example, they have book guides, and you can get the kind of key points out of the book without spending all of the time reading the books. If you look in the description, there'll be an affiliate link there, and you can trial it for free for 5 days just to check it out. Basically, you can read a bunch of books kind of fast. So the next book that has changed my life is called Tribe of Mentors, and technically it's by Tim Ferriss, but basically the whole book is just him asking a bunch of very successful people the same 11 questions. And one of the questions that he asks was around failure. A vast majority of people, when answering this question, they spoke about failure in a very positive light. And more specifically, they reflected upon how something that was perceived as a failure at one point was actually, it was a setup for something better, or it was just redirection. That has been incredibly useful for me, just as a mindset. I fail all the time. I'm always failing. I'm always trying things. It doesn't work out. I can get down on myself very easily. You know, he interviewed some of the most well-known people on this planet, and they all seem to share this common sentiment that failure is just a vital part of the journey. And so maybe I'm deluding myself into thinking that my failures are leading me somewhere, but it's a good delusion to have. And to be honest, I can look back at some of my failures now and I realize why I failed and why it needed to be that way to bring me to where I am now, which is the best place I've ever been in my life anyway. So Tribe of Mentors, Tim Ferriss, check it out. The next book that changed my life is The Surrender Experiment by Michael A. Singer. So that book is basically him talking about how he surrendered to the flow of the universe, and he only would act upon things that really presented themselves to him. It's a crazy story. Like, the businesses that he built, the land he acquired, the community he built, everything was just bizarre. From reading it, it's just like it unfolded effortlessly, and that's the name comes from just surrendering. So he was testing to see what would the universe give him if he did nothing to, you know, orchestrate anything. It's one of those ones, it's hard to say, like, was it just a one-off? Or does he perceive surrender as different to how I perceive it? I don't know, but it's just really inspiring to observe all of these random, you know, like synchronicities or chance encounters, whatever you want to call them, that allowed him to cultivate the life and the businesses that he did cultivate. A lot of the time when I'm in like a, you know, a negative headspace, remembering that anything can change at any moment, and it can happen when I least expect it. Oftentimes, you know, bad things happening, or like a failure, as we talked about earlier on with the Tribe of Mentors, a failure isn't like a bad thing. All a failure is like your ego's expectations have not been met, and so we call it a failure. If you look at it through the lens of like Michael A. Singer's book, it's a failure isn't a failure at all. It's just, that's just what the universe is doing with you. Now, the next book, I'm just going to call it 3 books because it's a type of book, and they are adventure books. This one here is called The Power of the Paddle. This one here is The Road to Sparta. And this is Born to Run. What they all have in common is that they show the amazing potential and capacity that humans have to overcome adversity. So they're about running stupid long distances, or the power of the paddle is about paddling around the UK and Ireland. And these are just feats that there's no good reason to do them other than just to see if you can do them. And they're incredibly painful. And like, reading the stories just, it brings me to tears so often. I'm a very emotional person when it comes to books and movies. Like, I just cry. Like, when I realize that like a human has just overcome something, or like they've just like, you know, gone through something, I'm just like, I'm just their cheerleader, and I cheer by just crying, basically. What I really loved about these books is that these people are endurance athletes. You know, they're doing things that I can do and that you can do. And I used to be one of those people that thought running was stupid. I was like, why would you bother doing that? And then I decided to start running, and then I, you know, decided to test myself, and I ran a marathon, and that was something that I never thought I'd ever be able to do. And it was really difficult, and it was really painful. And you could say it was pointless to do it, but to know that I can overcome that pain and hardship is just incredible for me. You know, overcoming adversity is such a confidence booster. And I apply the same kind of philosophy that gets you through a marathon or whatever to any aspect of life. So if I'm having business problems, if I'm having personal problems, it's just one step at a time. And it is so simple, and it's difficult to embrace the simplicity, because, you know, it's so easy to just want to quit and give up in the middle of a run or a workout or whatever when it gets painful. But if you just persist, you will overcome whatever it is that you're battling. And at the end of the day, when you're just sitting there with your feet up, it's like, wow, I did that, you know? And I think that's what life is about. It's about navigating the ebb and the flow and the ups and the downs, and forcefully putting yourself in those situations is just what I consider to be a great way of practicing, you know, self-discipline and mental toughness, whatever you want to call it. So any of those books, all of those books, I would highly recommend them. Now, the final book is a book that, if you ask me what's my favorite book, I'd probably say this book. And it is Scar Tissue by Antonioni. So it's a biography or autobiography, one or the other of them. I love Antonioni. I love the Red Hot Chili Peppers. My first ever concert was the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Again, like just witnessing how another human has navigated life and how their path unfolded is so inspiring, because the stuff that happened, that adversity that was navigated was crazy. And for somebody that I admire to have, you know, gone through so much and then ended up where they are, it's just, you know, kind of gives me like a bit of encouragement, you know, to persist. And just some of the stories in that book are just so bizarre. Like there's one part where he's got loads of drugs on him basically, and he's been pulled over and he's been searched, but for whatever reason the officer doesn't search the one pocket that has his stuff in it. And it was just like one of those moments where like, what was that? God, are you there? Highly recommend it. Scar Tissue by Antonioni. So those are the books that have had a profound impact on my life. I'll put links to all of the books mentioned in the description, and also I'll put a link to the short form book summary platform I mentioned as well. You get a 5-day free trial with them. Also, I've opened up applications to work one-on-one with me for you building your online presence, personal branding, speaking to camera, doing stuff like this. There's an application form down in the description as well. Click that, and if we're a good fit, I'll get in touch with you. And other than that, have a beautiful day. Talk to you next time. See ya.